Hello and welcome to Lady Dynamite Creates. This is Tiffany and it's another doll collab. I know there's been a lot of these lately. Joining me in this creepy Valentine's collab is our host Diamonza Craft, Tally Dollies, Fairykin, Starlight Dream Dolls, Stitch Witch Creations, Steffo Doll, Insanely Creating, Unbridled Artistry, Lemon Kitten Creations, Doll Afterlife. I've left links to their videos in the description box, so be sure to head over to their channels when you get done here to check out their awesome art. Catmelian Studio was also a part of this collab, but they're running a bit behind, so be on the lookout for her video in a couple of weeks. Let's jump right into selecting a doll and getting her prepped for customization. I knew I wanted to use a doll base with an open smile, but I didn't have a lot of those to choose from in my stock box. After looking at my available bases, I decided to repaint my very first Descendants doll. I prepped her the same way I usually do, by buzzing her hair, popping the head off, then removing the remaining plugs, and acetone will make quick work of the factory paint. The theme of the collab was Creepy Valentine, and the idea was to create something related to creepy love, like vampires, succubus, or sirens. I immediately thought of obsession, and to create a doll representing this destructive power. I felt like the open-mouthed smile would help me to push her expression to an extreme and further illustrate her unhinged nature. Of course, in true Van Gogh fashion, I planned to have her giving away her heart quite literally. I don't know if you've seen the video by Sweet Bats, but we wound up doing nearly identical concepts this year for Valentine's Day. The day I saw her video, I reached out because I was worried she would think I'd copied hers, because even though my doll was finished, our collab videos wouldn't be out for a month. If you haven't seen her video, I highly suggest checking it out. She did a really great job. After I got the head completely prepped, I decided I didn't like the widow's peaks, so I swapped the head out for another Eevee. I think this is a reboot head because it is slightly rounder than the original. I get started rerouting the doll in this high-temp hair from the Doll Planet. I wetted a bit to make handling more manageable. Once I have a plug-sized piece, I slide it onto the tool, then plunge it into the head. The vinyl on this head was on the harder side, and I kept breaking needles, so I had to push a needle into each hole before plugging it with hair. My final needle count was 9, which is crazy because my previous needle lasted through 3 reroots. With all of the holes finally filled, I can secure the plugs with some liquid fusion glue. I swirl it around on the inside to make sure I hit all the plugs. Now for some body mods. Since she's giving away her heart, she obviously needs a hole in her chest. I use my drill to carefully drill out the area I have previously marked with pencil. I go in later with wood carving tools to refine the shape and add a few claw marks. I did most of this off camera because I'm not super comfortable with these tools yet and wanted my attention on the sharp tool in my hand and not my viewfinder. With the carving out of the way, I need to fill up some of this space inside the body so I can create a cavity and surface to paint on. I stuff a surprising amount of aluminum foil into this tiny space. I heat up a tiny scrap of Fibra, which is another kind of thermoplastic that's super smooth, and use it to create the inside of the chest. Descendants come with these really crappy rubber hands, and of course when I tried to remove the paint, they pretty much fell apart. Instead, I'm going to harvest the peg and 3D print some custom hands for her. I bought a BJD hand STL file from Colts, which I'll leave in the description box, but it wouldn't work as is, so I scaled it and sculpted a new wrist and peg slot on the end to match the Eevee doll. The hands do need a bit of sanding to remove the support marks. The pegs themselves also need an adjustment. I first tried filling them in with epoxy sculpt, but that just crumbled when I drilled the pinholes. But I found that thermoplastic to work the best because it bonded to the plastic. I drill a really small hole through the wrist joint with my rotary tool, and then place the peg into the correct position and create its hole with a hot needle. This worked perfectly and has so much potential for all those handless doll bases. I just need to figure out a way to print more durable wrist pegs. Okay, here's your warning. I will be painting bloody stuff now. I did contain it to one area though, so it's easily skipped if you don't want to see it. I bust out my Vallejo acrylic paint and mix up a few different shades of red. I start with a pretty bright base coat, then do a few washes of darker colors to create depth and texture. I gloss over the inside with tinted UV resin for a wet look. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of my lovely supporters on Patreon because they help make these videos possible. Angel Book Walter, Awkward Burb, B. Burnett, Deborah Sweeney, Jay Zur, Lurker Cat, Stephanie L., And Who Made This, Josephine, Delicious, The Merry Mess, Me Water Lily, Beck's Mini Studio, Dancing Johari, Echo 1911, Kitsy, K. Whip L., Lindsay, The Oak Magpie, Tara N., Totally Spooky. I gave the hands a tiny manicure, then give them the exact same treatment. I 3D printed a heart from Thingiverse and got it painted off camera. I think it turned out really cute for a bloody muscle. I don't know, but I think the smaller something gets, the cuter it is. It's weird. I need patterns for the clothing because I've never worked on this body type before, but I discovered with adjustments and scaling that smart doll patterns will work. Here's the first draft of the shirt with the pattern just scaled. Changes were needed because some pieces became too small to be easily sewn and looked neat. These pieces are my final pattern draft after making changes. I first connect the two back pieces together, fold the cuffs and pleats on the sleeves, and attach the facing to the front pieces. I sew the front pieces to the back along the shoulder seam. A bit of editing magic gets the sleeves attached to the armholes. Now that the base of the garment is constructed, I'll fold this right side's facing and sew up the side seams and sleeves. Most of the bottom edge is already finished because of the facing, but the back portion is still a raw edge, so I fold this under and hem it with a bit of hem tape to avoid visible stitches. The collar piece is attached to the neck hole now, and I managed to lose footage of creating the collar piece. I folded it in half and sewed the side seams, but leave an 1/8 of an inch gap on the bottom edge and flip it right side out. I fold the inside seam allowance under and press. Once the collar is attached, I tuck the raw edge into the collar and top stitch in place. I use watered down acrylic paint to dirty up the shirt. I wanted to make a pleated skirt, but couldn't find any fabric that I liked that was doll scale, so I created my own. I created a tieable pattern in Photoshop, then applied it as a pattern overlay effect and scaled it to the desired size. I then sent this off to the sublimation printer. Here is the printed transfer. The colors will look more muted before it's applied to the fabric. I attach the paper to my fabric using heat transfer tape so that the design won't shift. I make sure the printed side is facing the fabric, then I hop over to the heat press. Once pressed, I remove the tape and paper and have an awesome pattern left behind. This is just such a cool process because the fabric stays really soft. I cut out my pattern pieces and mark everything, but before I start making pleats, I need to hem the bottom edge. I'm using hem tape here so there are no visible stitches. Now I can get started on the pleats. I fold my pleat along the two marked lines with a peak and a valley and make sure that the peak matches up to my dots. This is very time consuming, but I want my pleats to be neat and even. I pin each pleat at the top and the bottom, and it ends up looking like this. I give it a press and stitch along the top edge to secure the pleats. Normally you would top stitch along this pleat here, but the thread stands out too much for my taste on this fabric. Instead, I'm going to use hem tape cut to the stitch length to create the iconic look. You can see the pleat will no longer lift up at the top centimeter of the skirt. I attach the waistband to the top of the skirt with right sides facing. I attach the lining to the waistband and sew along the top and side edges. I flip the waistband right side out and tuck the bottom raw edge in on itself and stitch in place. I add Velcro as a closure and sew up the back of the skirt, and it's done. This skirt was deceptively hard. It took me so many tries to get the pleats right, but I really like how it looks. I will be sharing these adjusted patterns for Descendants dolls with my patrons. It turns out that my G3 shoes fit the Descendants dolls, so I printed up my skull dagger heels and got them painted. I've actually been in the process of updating my Etsy shop, and now all of my shoes are printed on the HeyGears Reflex printer and use a more durable resin. This is especially beneficial to the more delicate shoes like the butterfly wing sandals. Once painted, I give the top of the shoes a coat of UV resin for that patent leather look. It's face-up time, and these are all of the supplies that I've used. Various chalk pastels and watercolor pencils. A full list is in the description box. I've prepped her with 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear, and then I jump right in. I tend to always start my face-ups with the eye shape, and this time I want her eyes to be very big. I want it to look like she's opening her eyes really wide in a crazy way. Like I said, I want her to look unhinged. Looking at images of Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn was very useful reference for her expression. I sketched in her iris, but I made them with her glancing slightly off to the side and wound up not liking this, so I erased and made them more centered. Normally I would draw my irises with a portion of the top under the eyelid, but there is something unsettling about seeing more of the sclera's, so I exaggerated it to give her a more downward gaze. I landed on green eyes to associate it with envy and jealousy, which would go hand in hand with obsession, but I honestly wished I would have gone a bit more aqua to pull in the color accent from her skirt. The face-up is usually the last thing that I do because I like matching my face-up colors with the fabrics I choose, but this time around the fabric was a big hold-up. First, I spent 2 days trying to fix my sublimation printer, which I was unsuccessful at, and finally just ordered a transfer online. Honestly, I should have never bought that printer. It was a mistake, and it's caused me nothing but problems, but I digress. After I finally gave in and just ordered it, it got lost in the mail and took nearly 3 weeks to arrive when it was originally supposed to take 3 days. Rather than just sitting around and not working, I moved forward with the face-up instead. I honestly really liked that printer when I first got it, but I definitely should have done a bit more research on it before buying because the constant printer head flushing and cleaning made it a hassle to deal with and resulted in me never wanting to use it. What's been your biggest art supply regret? I hope I'm not the only one making these stupid kind of mistakes. On the start of the second layer, I sketch in her eyebrows with a bit of pastel, creating a high arch to really push the expression. I also start adding some details into the eyes. I didn't want her teeth to just be a flat white, so I use a pencil to define some of the individual teeth and give it some shape. I painted her lashes with a brush that I've decided I hate. I did see a post by Freyja Rune dolls on Instagram showing how they cut away fibers on their brushes to get them to be the perfect shape. So I'm going to give that a try on this brush since I already don't like it. If you haven't seen their dolls before, they have some of the best face-ups I've ever seen and create stunning dolls. I paint on some mascara runs and use a Q-tip with watercolor on it to smear some makeup streaks around her eyes and mouth. I do a bit of shading on the eyes to give it a rounder feel. I tend to use shades of blue to do this because I feel like the effect looks more natural compared to straight black. I add in catch lights and highlights to the waterline, then do a quick pass on the teeth, and this face-up's done. I love how she turned out, and I can feel the unpredictability and chaos that she exudes. Now for the hairstyling. Off camera, I've sectioned off the hair and did a quick boil wash to help tame it down. The overall look I want is crimped and wavy, so I'm braiding off small sections of hair. I find it easier to braid while it's wet, so I make sure to keep a spray bottle handy to spritz whenever it gets too dry. When it's completely braided, I dunk it into boiling water to set it. After 24 hours, it's had a chance to dry, so I carefully unbraid each section, then trim away the ends that are not textured. It's a tedious process, but well worth the effort. All that's left to do is pop her head back onto her body and take a look at the final photos. Don't forget this doll is part of the Creepy Valentine collab, so be sure to check out the wonderful creations made by my collab partners. The links to their videos are down in the description box. I decided to forego a proper name this time and simply call her Lovesick. She is for sale, and if you're interested in her or one of my other dolls, be sure to check out my Etsy shop, Lady Dynamite Creates. I wanted to thank you so much for watching this video and staying until the end, and remember, always be creating!